The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted women the right to vote. This right, known as women's suffrage, was ratified on August 18, 1920. Quote, "The right of citizens in the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." This was the beginning of an ongoing fight for women's rights, which began the fight for women's suffrage and what would later be known as the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This fight begins with the first Women's Rights Convention being held in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. The first organization advocating for suffrage, irrespective of race, color, or sex, was the American Equal Rights Association, formed in 1866. A couple years later, the organization split into two groups over disagreements about the 14th and soon-to-be 15th Amendments. The National Women's Suffrage Association, NWSA, out of New York, focused its efforts on securing women the vote through federal legislation, while the American Women's Suffrage Association, AWSA, based in Boston, approached the issue through state legislation. Soon in 1869, Wyoming became a territory and passed a bill giving women full voting rights. Then, it was nearly a quarter of a century before any other state afforded its women the right to vote. The first federal legislation proposing equal suffrage for men and women based on citizenship was in 1868. The resolution was not yet debated, it laid on the table. The first federal legislation proposing equal voting rights specifically for women was in 1878, but the resolution was not yet acted upon until 1887, when it was unfortunately defeated in the Senate by a 16-34 vote. Later, in 1890, the NWSA and the AWSA reunited to become the National American Women's Suffrage Association, coordinating the national women's movement and finding success in individual states. Between 1893 and 1918, women won full or partial voting rights in 20 states. At federal level, resolutions were proposed and hearings were held every few years, but there were no further votes on women's suffrage. On March 3, 1913, thousands of women participated in a women's suffrage procession in downtown Washington, D.C., where they were met with resistance and could proceed only with the assistance of the U.S. Army. In the end, the proposed amendment was then sent to the states for ratification. On August 18, 1920, Tennessee became the 36th state to approve the amendment. Then on August 26, 1920, the U.S. Secretary of State verified that the required number of authenticated ratification documents had been received and added the 19th Amendment. And although it wasn't the final end to restrictions, it was a start to a fight for suffrage to be upheld by the U.S. Constitution that will last for many years to come.